For decades, Michael Anthony kept quiet, loyal, respectful, and silent about what really tore Van Halen apart. He was the steady heartbeat of one of rock's most explosive bands, a man who never fought for the spotlight. But silence has its breaking point. At 70, Michael finally decided to tell his side, the betrayal, the humiliation, and the truth about what really happened behind the curtain of Van Halen's glory years. The loyal bassist who never fought back. Michael Anthony never chased fame. He was never the loudest voice in the room, never the one demanding attention. From the beginning, he seemed content standing just a few steps behind the spotlight, letting the others take the glory while he anchored the music with precision, harmony, and humility. But what made Michael different was not only his talent, it was his quiet loyalty, a quality that would eventually become both his greatest virtue and his biggest curse. Born on June 20th, 1954, in Chicago, Illinois, Michael Anthony Sobolewski grew up in a working-class family where music filled every corner of their home. His father, a trumpet player, often performed in local bands, and that early exposure to melody and rhythm shaped Michael's ear. He started on the trumpet too, learning discipline and tone long before picking up a bass. When his family moved to Arcadia, California in the mid-1960s, music became his way of fitting in. At school, he joined the marching band, played sports, and dreamed of becoming a professional musician. Not a star, but someone who could make a living doing what he loved. It was at Pasadena City College in the early 1970s that fate intervened. The Van Halen brothers, Eddie and Alex, were already local legends, performing under the name Mammoth. Their bassist, Mark Stone, had just left, and they were looking for someone new. When they met Michael, they saw not just skill, but commitment. He could play, sing, and most importantly, he showed up. After one rehearsal, the brothers knew he was the missing piece. By 1974, Michael Anthony officially joined what would soon become Van Halen. The chemistry was undeniable. Eddie's guitar wizardry, Alex's thunderous drums, David Lee Roth's charisma, and Michael's smooth, high harmonies created a sound that was both wild and precise. When Warner Brothers released their self-titled debut album Van Halen in 1978, it changed everything. Songs like Runnin' with the Devil and Jamie's Cryin' exploded on the radio. Eddie's Eruption solo became legend, and Michael's voice, that soaring, angelic harmony, became the hidden power behind the band's anthems. Critics called it the secret weapon of Van Halen's sound. Yet, while fame and money transformed the others, Michael stayed grounded. He didn't fight over solos, songwriting credits, or headlines. He just played. His powerful backing vocals lifted the music, but his name was rarely mentioned. Even when tensions flared between Eddie and Roth, Michael stayed neutral, trying to hold the band together. He believed loyalty mattered more than ego. He believed hard work spoke louder than fame. For years, that quiet dedication kept Van Halen's machine running. But what he didn't know was that, in a world where egos ruled and credit meant everything, silence could also make you invisible. And one day, it would cost him everything. The breaking point: contracts, control, and silence. By 1984, the cracks inside Van Halen were impossible to ignore. What had started as four hungry musicians chasing the American dream had turned into a battlefield of egos. The band's explosive rise, fueled by Eddie's genius and David Lee Roth's charisma, made them legends, but also prisoners of their own success. For Michael Anthony, who had always seen the band as a brotherhood, that brotherhood was falling apart piece by piece. Behind the curtain, power had shifted. Eddie and Alex Van Halen were no longer just bandmates. They were the gatekeepers. They controlled the finances, the business, and ultimately, the destiny of everyone involved. During the 1984 tour, the height of Van Halen's fame, Michael was suddenly called into a private meeting. What happened next would haunt him for decades. He was told by management that if he wanted to stay in the band, he had to sign documents relinquishing his share of future royalties, publishing rights, and a portion of merchandising income. Even worse, the agreement was retroactive, meaning he would lose not only future profits but also part of what he had already earned. Standing in the room were Eddie and Alex, silent but firm. Michael recalled later that he felt cornered, outnumbered by the brothers he had once trusted. "I just signed it," he said years later, and that was that. The papers cost him millions, but at the time, walking away wasn't an option. Van Halen was his life, and loyalty had always guided his decisions. He told himself that staying quiet and keeping the peace would eventually heal things. It never did. When David Lee Roth left in 1985, many believed the band was finished. But then came Sammy Hagar, whose energy and songwriting revived Van Halen for a new generation. The chemistry between Hagar and Anthony brought balance, at least for a while. On stage, they laughed together, harmonized perfectly, and carried the weight of the band's live shows while Eddie's guitar took flight. Off stage, though, the atmosphere was tense. Control still belonged to the Van Halen brothers, and Michael's position remained delicate. By the mid-1990s, after Hagar's departure, rumors began circulating that Michael had been quietly pushed out. Officially, he was still part of the family, appearing in interviews and occasional rehearsals. But inside, he knew the writing was on the wall. When the band attempted several failed reunions with Roth between 1996 and 2001, Michael found himself left out of key decisions. He was there in body, not in spirit, tolerated, not embraced. The breaking point came in 2004 when the band announced another reunion tour with Sammy Hagar. At first, it sounded like a dream come true, a chance to remind the world of what made Van Halen legendary. But the reality was humiliating. Eddie told Michael he could join only if he signed away all remaining rights to the Van Halen name and accepted a drastically reduced salary. Essentially, the man who had sung and played on every Van Halen record since 1978 was being demoted to a sideman in the band he helped build. "You can play," Eddie reportedly told him, "but you're not a member anymore." It was an ultimatum, and Michael had every reason to walk away, but he didn't. He accepted, not for fame or money, but for the fans. "I just wanted to do it for the people who still cared," he later explained. It was a decision made out of love, not pride. Yet deep down, he knew something had broken beyond repair. The 2004 reunion tour was supposed to celebrate Van Halen's legacy. Instead, it exposed the band's decay. Eddie's drinking spiraled out of control, his health deteriorated, and his behavior became erratic. Sammy Hagar later called it an emotional disaster. The once powerful machine that had changed rock music was now limping through its final act, angry, fractured, and exhausted. When the tour ended, there were no hugs, no promises, no goodbyes. Michael walked away quietly, but he knew the truth. The friendship he once had with Eddie was gone. The band that had once united them had turned into the very thing that tore them apart, and this time, there would be no going back. Silence, replacement, and the final betrayal. After the collapse of the 2004 reunion tour, Michael Anthony did what he had always done best. He kept moving forward quietly. While Van Halen dissolved into chaos once again, Michael chose peace. He poured his energy into side projects with Sammy Hagar, first with the Wabaritas, then Planet Us, and later the supergroup Chickenfoot, alongside Joe Satriani and Chad Smith. Away from the toxic atmosphere of Van Halen, he rediscovered the joy of playing for the music itself. But even as he began building a new chapter in his life, the past refused to leave him alone. In early 2006, the news broke like a slap in the face. Eddie Van Halen announced that his son, Wolfgang Van Halen, would replace Michael as the band's new bassist. For Michael, the shock wasn't the replacement itself. It was how it happened. There was no call, no meeting, no courtesy. He found out the same way the fans did, through the internet. "I wasn't even told," he said years later. "I saw it online like everyone else." For a man who had dedicated over 30 years of his life to Van Halen, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. There were no thank yous, no goodbyes, just erasure. Eddie called the new lineup a reunion, a celebration of Van Halen's original spirit. But to Michael, it was anything but. "That wasn't a reunion," he said bitterly. "That was a revision." The brothers didn't reach out. Communication between Michael, Eddie, and Alex had completely ceased. Years of tension and unspoken resentment had built an invisible wall between them. But Eddie didn't stop there. In interviews, he began diminishing Michael's contributions to the band's legacy. He told reporters that he had to teach Michael every note, that the bassist couldn't play without guidance. It was a cruel rewriting of history, one that painted Michael as an amateur rather than the accomplished musician who had been there from day one. For Michael, it was devastating. He had been part of every hit, every tour, every late-night rehearsal. He had shared stages with Eddie across continents, watched him create masterpieces in the studio, and harmonized beside him night after night. To be told publicly that he had needed to be taught was not just inaccurate, it was insulting. In a rare moment of anger years later, Michael finally addressed the accusation. "That's the biggest lie I've ever heard in my life. There was never a video camera showing him teaching me how to play anything. I was in that band for 11 years. I knew what I was doing." Even then, he stopped short of personal attacks. Unlike others, he refused to escalate the feud. While Eddie's bitterness festered in interviews, Michael stayed silent. He toured, played music, smiled for fans, and avoided gossip. It wasn't weakness, it was restraint. He had seen too much of what bitterness could do to people in that band. Still, silence can be heavy, and for Michael, it was filled with grief, nostalgia, and questions that would never be answered. When Eddie passed away in October 2020 at age 65 after a long battle with cancer, Michael's long-kept composure cracked. He posted 3 words on Instagram: "No words, heartbroken." Decades of loyalty, frustration, and unspoken pain condensed into one moment of loss. For all the resentment, Michael had never stopped admiring Eddie's genius. And as the world mourned the guitarist who changed rock music forever, Michael faced a different kind of sorrow, the kind that comes from knowing there will never be a final conversation, never an apology, never peace between two men who once made magic together. The silence that had protected him for years had now become the thing that haunted him most. Regret and reflection, the reunion that never happened. When news of Eddie's death broke, Michael posted 3 simple words on Instagram: "No words, heartbroken." It was all he could say. In the years leading up to Eddie's passing, the two had not spoken. In a 2021 interview, Michael admitted, "We actually hadn't spoken, and unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to. It bothers me because we had some issues that were never resolved." He went on to explain that before Eddie's death, there had been talk, quiet, hopeful talk, about a full reunion. According to Michael and Wolfgang, Eddie had begun to soften in his final years, reconsidering the grudges of the past. He was starting to say, "Hey, the past is the past," Michael said. He wanted to put together a big tour with all of us, me, Hagar, Roth, Gary Sharon, everybody. The plan was to call it the Kitchen Sink Tour, a celebration of every era of Van Halen. But it never happened. Eddie's illness worsened in secret. He was very private about how sick he was, Michael said later. "We all knew he was ill, but it was a shock to all of us." Sammy Hagar, however, revealed that he had reconnected with Eddie in early 2020 through text messages. "It was a love fest," Hagar wrote. "We agreed not to tell anyone because of all the rumors it would start, but we were good again." For Michael, that reconciliation never came. Even after all the years of betrayal and silence, he wished for one conversation, one moment of peace. "If he hadn't passed when he did, I know we would have made things right," he said. "But it wasn't meant to be." Forgiveness, friendship, and closure. Through Wolfgang. After Eddie's death, Michael found an unexpected bridge to closure. Eddie's son, Wolfgang. In a 2023 interview, he said that reconnecting with Wolfgang helped him heal old wounds. "We've always been friends," Michael explained. "Eddie just wanted to play with his son, and I understand that. Wolfgang wanted to build his own identity. That's why he doesn't play Van Halen songs in his band. I respect that." He attended one of Wolfgang's mammoth VWH shows, and the two shared a quiet moment backstage. For Michael, it was more than a meeting. It was a symbolic closing of the book. "Talking to Wolf gave me a kind of closure," he said. "It made me feel like maybe Eddie knew that, deep down, we were still connected somehow." Though many fans demanded he speak out, Michael chose forgiveness. In interviews, he said he doesn't hold grudges. He admits Eddie was difficult, but also a genius, someone whose brilliance sometimes came with chaos. "It was never easy," he said, "but the music we made, that's forever." At 70, Michael still tours with Sammy Hagar under the circle, playing Van Halen classics for crowds that never forgot. Each night, when he hits the high harmony on Why Can't This Be Love or Right Now, the audience erupts, not just for nostalgia, but for something purer. For the man who never quit believing in the music, even when the band stopped believing in him. The truth that needed to be told. For decades, Michael Anthony kept the pain to himself. But as time passed, he began to open up, not out of bitterness, but honesty. He spoke of the manipulation, the contracts, the way Eddie's words hurt him more than any argument ever could. "He used to tell me, 'If you ever leave this band, your career is over,'" Michael recalled. "But music was my life. I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me." He now admits that his silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. "I didn't leave Van Halen to join Chickenfoot," he clarified. "I left because the situation became impossible. The tension, the disrespect, I couldn't do it anymore." Looking back, he still calls Eddie one of the greatest musicians of all time. But for Michael, exposing the truth was never about revenge. It was about finally reclaiming his voice after years of being silenced. "I'll always love what we did together," he said softly. "I just wish it had ended differently." Michael Anthony's story isn't about anger, it's about heartbreak, loyalty, and the price of silence. In the end, he didn't need Van Halen's name to prove his worth. He only needed to tell the truth. What do you think? Should the Van Halen brothers have brought Michael back before it was too late? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold rock stories.